Tomorrow marks 25 years since one of the deadliest school shootings in U.S. history. 12 students and a teacher were murdered, and 21 other people were injured in a carefully planned attack at Columbine High School in Colorado. The shooters, 17 and 18 years old, killed themselves at the end of their rampage. Their massacre marked the beginning of active shooter drills at schools and resulted in changes to how police respond to these situations. Still, there have been hundreds of school shootings since Columbine, some even deadlier. My next guest was the principal of Columbine High School when the shooting happened. Frank DeAngelis joins me now from Hope Columbine Memorial Library at the school this evening. Frank, thank you so much for taking the time to be here on Canada Tonight. I wonder how you're feeling being back in that school 25 years later.
It's difficult to believe. At times it seemed like it was just yesterday, and other times it does seem like 25 years. And something that deeply touched me, I was talking to Anna, who is Lauren Townsend's mother, and she said that Lauren this year would have been 43 years old, and that was the age I was when I was principal 25 years ago.
It is so incredible that 25 years has passed. Do you get flashbacks sometimes of that day?
Most definitely. Usually, when I start getting texts saying you're in my thoughts and prayers, within 5 minutes, the media starts calling, for example, Parkland, Sandy Hook, Uvalde. And there's certain things that just trigger emotions. I can remember watching what was happening at Parkland, and with those kids running with their hands up over their heads, just reminded me what we had at Columbine that day. And it takes you through the same thing, even though it's many years later. And fortunately, I've been in counseling and I've come up with skills that helps me get to where I need to be to continue to help Columbine and other communities.
You know, we're watching some of the visuals now. I remember where I was that day. I mean, most people that were watching this, was the first time we were seeing this kind of event unfold at a school for many people. You're back in that school. This is a new library that has been created to remember some of the victims. And I understand that there's going to be a vigil tomorrow. Tell me how the community is going to be remembering the victims.
Victims, one of the things is what we did is we did a remembrance at year 1, 2, and 3, and then year 4 was Easter, and then we did year 5, 10, 15, and 20. And I reached out to the families this year, and they said they did not want a public remembrance. So what we have been doing is we've been working with some of the local media, and they are really running stories that I made a comment at the first year remembrance, a time to remember, a time for hope. And Columbine represents hope. So the stories that are being run now about the families is, for example, I would love the world to know this about my son or daughter or my husband. We're doing tomorrow, Jeff Garco, who is a 2006 graduate, and Sam Daly are doing a day of service, and we've done that for the past 7 years. And we will have over 1,100, not only here in the Columbine community, but across the nation, and even out of other countries. Tasnia is also being involved. So it's really a day of service. Parents get involved, alumni get involved, and of course the students at Columbine.
Take me back to April 20th, 1999, the day of the shooting. You were in your office, I understand, when this all started. How did you find out that people with guns were in the school?
Well, I was in my office that day, and I was getting ready to go down to lunch duty, where I go every day. And all of a sudden, my secretary comes running towards my door, and my door was shut. I was talking to a teacher, getting ready to offer him a job. And she just face planted in this little window, and I knew something was wrong. And she stated, "Mr. D, there's been a report of gunfire and bombs exploding." And the first thing that I thought about is, this can't be happening. I mean, we're about a month away from graduation. I said, this has to be a senior prank. I had been here 20 years prior, my 3rd year as principal, and all of a sudden I come out of my office and my worst nightmare becomes a reality, because about 75 yards away, the gunman was coming towards me, and I went through something, everything just slowed down. And after talking to my secretary and Kiki Leba, who was the teacher with me, said, I ran right towards the gunfire, and people said, why? And one reason and one reason only, I had some girls that were coming out of the locker room to go to a physical education class, and they were unaware it was happening. They were going to be right in the middle of the crossfire. Now, 25 years ago, the only drills we did here in Colorado were fire drills. We didn't know these other drills, but I also was familiar with the school that if I knew I got the girls into the gymnasium, I would be able to put them in a safe place and then eventually come in, get them, and take them outside. Everything was going as planned until I pulled on the gymnasium door and it was locked. The girls are saying, "Save us, Papa." They're praying, and all of a sudden, as the sounds of the shots are getting louder, the gunman's coming around the corner. I had 30 keys on a key ring, and I reached in my pocket, and the first key I stuck in the door, opened it on the first
Wow.
try, or I went conducting this interview. And I got to share a story with you that gets to me every time. A couple of years ago, our girls' softball team was playing in the state championship, so I'm at the game, and one of the girls who was with me back on April 20th, 1999 comes up, and it gets very emotional, and we're hugging each other, and all of a sudden she spins me around and said, "Mr. D, I am so glad you found the key that day, because if you didn't, that girl wouldn't be playing right field. She's my daughter." And I said I had very little to do in finding the key that day.
Wow, I'm getting chills. You stayed on as principal at Columbine High School for years after the shooting. Why did you do that? At any point, did you consider, leaving, quitting?
I did. And basically, I made a promise. I remember the next day, I had to meet with the students and staff, and there were politicians there, and we were over at Light of the World Church. And I didn't know what I was going to say. I was still kind of in shock. And as I got in front of them, it was really interesting because we had our prom on that Saturday, which would have been April 17th. Well, on April 16th, I told the kids how much I cared about them and how much I wanted them to make wise choices, because I wanted to see their smiling faces on Monday. And I said, "I love each and every one of you, and I look forward to attending, your graduation, your weddings, and things of that nature." Well, Columbine happens on the 20th, 3 days after, and all of a sudden I walked back in there and I said, "Do you remember how much I told you I loved you back on last Friday?" And I said, "I love you even more today." And I said, "We need to come together. That's what happens to families when they struggle through difficult times." And I said, "I promise you, I will be here until the class of 2002 graduates." Well, it's coming upon 2001, 2002 school year, and I knew I had to make a decision, but I'm a person of faith and so lucky to have survived. And the priest where I had attended the church for 20 years said, "Frank, you should have died that day, but God's got a plan. One of the things that you need to do is rebuild that community and help others around the country." And so as I'm thinking about those words, I said, "I have not rebuilt the community." So I announced prior to the 2001, 2002 school year to stay until every kid who was in the elementary school in the Columbine area was there. I wanted to hand them their diplomas, because even though they were not in the building, they were directly affected by everything that happened within the community. And so I retired in 2014, and all the kids who were in elementary school that day had me as their principal.
Let me ask you this. I got to run here in a second, but I want to ask you before we go. In the intro, I said that, this happened 25 years ago, and there have been hundreds of school shootings since. How does this stop?
I use the example of whenever I go out and help these other communities. I'm part of the Principals Recovery Network, in which there are 25 of us in which we've had school shootings within our communities. But what I look for is there's not one set answer. If there was, we could take care of that. But I use the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. And one of the first places you look is some of our gun laws. There are loopholes. As a matter of fact, after Columbine, they strengthened or they changed some of the gun laws in Colorado for independent gun shows. But I also state, in addition to that, we got to continue to provide health services for our kids. When I hear schools are eliminating counselors or social workers, that bothers me. Something that is very relevant now that was not relevant back in 1999 is social media and the role that that plays. So we need to make sure our parents understand what their kids are doing. And then also, I think it's important that these kids realize we could put up cameras, we could put up metal detectors, but don't underestimate the power the students have, because so many times these perpetrators, these potential killers are posting. And if they could let an adult know, for example, in Colorado, we have the Safe to Tell. And I think a lot of these events could be stopped if we come together. I remember right after they said, Mr. D, what are you going to do? And I said, what are we going to do? Because they're all of our kids.
On the eve of a somber anniversary, we appreciate you taking the time tonight, Frank. Certainly do.
Thank you for allowing me to share my story.
That is Frank DeAngelis, the retired principal of Columbine High School. We reached him tonight in Littleton, Colorado.